This is your complimentary video tutorial to go along with the ImagineFX workshop. Mainly making this tutorial because I couldn't cover everything in the article, so this is a bit more of an in-depth look at my process. So I'll be starting here with a few sketches. There was some sketches on screen there. I'm not going to cover the process for every single sketch there, just because the video is already getting quite long, but this is the process for the successful sketch, the one that I went with. So yeah, I'm basically just starting with some line work, trying to battle with the image and find a nice composition. I am sort of fighting with it a little bit here, and I didn't think this one had much potential until right at the end. It kind of pulled it together towards the end of it. So kind of just doing a lot of pushing and pulling with the line work, taking advantage of the fact that I am in Photoshop and I can just grab things and move them around quite easily, which is not something you can do with traditional media. So yeah, and throughout this tutorial, I won't be talking throughout the whole duration of it. With it being an hour and a half long, that would probably be quite a lot, and you'll be sick of the sound of my voice. But I will chime in at key moments. So yeah, like I said, just working on some sketches at the moment, and it's a good idea to spend as much time as you can in the sketching phase and do as many as you can, because no one makes good images every time, and it's good to get a few of the bad ones out of your system in the form of sketches. You're only wasting like 40 minutes or something if you do a bad sketch, whereas if you do a bad painting, you're wasting a lot more time. So that's not ideal if that happens. Yeah, so it's good to try out a few ideas in the form of sketches first, and then when you're finally happy with one, you can commit to it. So here I'm starting to paint underneath the line work with some silhouettes. I'm just keeping each sort of value on its own layer, so I can use those as masks later on in the process. And I don't know if you saw there as well, but there was a little sneak peek there of using some AI art. Not much. I'm just using it to generate some textures really for the background there. It's not particularly relevant to this piece at the moment. Yeah, I'm currently figuring out how to best integrate AI into my workflow. Maybe I'll do some sort of tutorial on that in future if this tutorial goes down well. Anyways, back on topic, I am now using the layers that I made originally with the silhouettes to basically clip layers onto them and paint within those silhouettes, using them as masks. This is a really effective way of making a more finished image, in a shorter amount of time. I think it keeps things nice and organized, and just keeps your edges sharp, and you don't end up with like a mushy painting towards the end. So yeah, I think it's a good approach to sketching as well, and it also helps you focus on the silhouettes and shapes early, rather than spending too much time worrying on things like lighting and texture when they're probably slightly lower down the hierarchy of what's important in a painting really. So yeah, it's starting to bring in some photo textures here, just to kind of bring up the overall detail level a little bit and make it feel like more of a painting than a sketch. I don't know. I just enjoy doing it. You don't really need to. This sketch doesn't have to be particularly detailed. It's more just to get the idea across, and kind of test out whether or not the image is gonna work. I probably did go a little bit overboard on this sketch. Got a bit overexcited, but yeah, that's just me. You don't have to do that. Yeah, I don't know if you noticed there when I was photo bashing, but one of the photos that I used there wasn't actually a photo. It was AI generated using disco diffusion. So yeah, I just kind of left that going in the background while I was painting, hoping that it would come up with some cool textures or even some ideas for a piece. It's always a good idea nowadays. But yeah, it came out with some really nice stuff, some useful textures. I'm also bringing in a texture of a pathway there, and I use a little trick using Actvis artwork plugin to basically instantly make the photo feel more like a painting. It's essentially the make concept art button. Just that's all I do all day. Just grab stuff off Google Images and apply that filter to it. Job done. Not really. Only joking. Yeah, I'm also trying to focus on my values quite a lot at this stage. With it being in black and white, it's quite easy to focus on the value structure of the piece. That is one of the main advantages of doing a black and white sketch first. Yeah, I'm just trying to look at putting, light against dark. Just whenever I've got a dark shape, I'll try and silhouette it with a lighter shape behind it. You don't always have to do that. Sometimes it's a good idea to lose edges. There's no you know there's no formula to this, but it's a good idea to put the highest contrast values around the focal point. So having a bright highlight there right at the end of the pathway, and then a dark shadow right behind it seems to work quite well. That's not actually what I do in the final piece, but it works well in the sketch. So there you go. And there we have the final sketch. This is what I chose to work with, and I think that's more than enough for me to get going on a 3D blockout. So just starting out in Blender now, I'm just throwing in a camera and a little figure there, and I'm basically just using the sketch as the background image for the camera, so I can just toggle it on and off or have it on 50% opacity as well, and basically just model to match that. Um, it takes a bit of back and forth to try and match stuff to the sketch, and you immediately realize how bad your perspective is and stuff. Because those buildings are not in the formation you would expect to see them in, but I'm not too fussed. That's fine. Yeah, also just throwing some materials on as early as possible as well. I like to get materials in pretty much straight away, because I will be lighting the scene very soon as well, and you can't really light the scene if you don't have the correct sort of colors and stuff on your mesh. You don't really know how bright to make your lights. But yeah, also I'm just bringing in some assets that I've gathered from Sketchfab and Megascans as well, and essentially just warping those into shape using the proportional editing to match them to the sketch. You've also just seen me there using a giant cube to cast a big shadow on the scene, and that's pretty good technique for kind of creating a bit of a vignette effect, having the foreground being darker and then the midground and background being much lighter. Kind of helps to keep things separate and gives it a little bit of depth. But yeah, I'm essentially just kit bashing with all of the assets that I've gathered here. Got quite a bit of a head start having these assets, but I do end up painting over pretty much all of them anyway. You can't really see them in the final. They're useful to have though. Good reference for lighting, and yeah, it's good for planning ahead. Yeah, as you can see, I'm starting to basically combine some of the assets together here to make a complete tree. Just grabbing a branch off one tree and jamming it on top of a trunk from another tree. Kind of looks a bit weird, but I'm going to paint over it anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. I'm also just bringing in a photo for the background there, just using it on an emissive shader. It's pretty much temporary, but just to get the overall feel of the image, it's useful to have that there. I feel like I'm in a jungle now, so that's good. Yeah, just continuing on throwing assets in and not really worrying too much about how they sit together, more just worrying about matching the shapes to the sketch and stuff at the moment, and can kind of unify them all later and set dress it a little bit with some plants and things like that. So right now I'm just adding in some volumetrics. Basically just made a big cube that engulfs the entire scene and applied a principal volume shader to it. Yeah, that's just on a really low density, so it gives it a little bit of haze over the entire scene. That's a little bit high at the moment, but yeah, you get the idea. I'm also adding a second volume cube here, and this doesn't actually end up being in the final image, but it's a cool little trick that you can use sometimes. Essentially using a spherical gradient within the cube to use that as a mask, and then you kind of get like a sphere of fog. You can just have clumps of fog in your scene. Yeah, it's quite useful, but yeah, like I said, it doesn't make it into this one because I don't actually end up having that much fog in the final render. I'm just playing with adding some shapes behind those buildings there. I thought of having a giant tree sort of behind them, and maybe all of those buildings are attached to the tree. But yeah, that does not make it into the final. I just end up having the buildings. It's quite a bit that kind of gets painted out. But you know, it's good to experiment with stuff. The images always kind of evolve as they go along. That is normal. So here's a cool trick I use quite a lot. I'm basically just making a plane and then using a spherical gradient on the plane, and essentially using that as a mask for an emissive shader. So you get a plane with like a big glowing circle on it. That's really good for adding haze to a scene. If you've got it with like really subtle levels of emissive strength, then just kind of adds a bit of a haze, which is quite nice, and it's good for separating layers out. You can separate, you know, the midground from the background by just putting a big emissive plane between them. It tends to work quite well. So right now I'm trying to match some of the colours on the different meshes to the overall colours of the scene. Don't know if you noticed up till now, but a lot of the a lot of the materials don't really mesh well together. Different values, different hues. But a really good way to get around that is to bring in a color ramp and just apply the sort of correct colors to that color ramp, and it'll basically just colorize the whole texture, and you kind of have everything sort of with the same color ramp on for the most part, and it'll basically unify the whole scene and make all the textures feel like they match. I'm also just bringing in some spotlights here just to kind of pick out some key areas and make that scent a bit brighter. Um, Also, that was really quick then. I don't know if you caught that, but I also just screenshotted the viewport and brought that into Photoshop just so I could flip it. That's a really good way of checking your composition and checking that it's balanced. Once you've been looking at the composition for quite a while, you tend to not really be able to see it properly, which is a strange way of describing it, but just flipping the image gives you fresh eyes, and you can kind of you can see what's wrong with it more easily. So that was very helpful when I was balancing the light in there. I'm doing it again. I tend to abuse that little trick quite a lot. Yeah, I'm also adding a noise texture to those fog planes there, just so it's not like a perfect soft round, circle. Uh, just kind of making it feel like there's some sort of like foggy clouds running through them a little bit. Adds a bit more interest, I guess. I'm also adding a top-down light with a slight blue color, which is kind of like faking a sky ambient light. And I'm also adding some planes with a gradient mask on them, just so I can kind of, I guess, cast a shadow with that light and have it so it's quite gradual, so it gets gradually darker as it gets closer to the camera, giving it a nice vignette effect. And now that the scene's sort of been put together more or less, the overall look is there. I'm starting to bring in some plants and just scatter them around. I do mostly manually scatter them around. There's me looking at a tutorial on how to get some subsurface scattering. None of us are perfect, but yeah, just scattering these around randomly. I wasn't intending on having too much, so I didn't mind placing them manually. I do a particle scatter later on, but I don't think it made a massive impact on the image. I don't really like things being random. I'm a bit of a control freak. I like having everything art directed. But yeah, it's also nice to kind of have the plants affecting the silhouettes. You can see on the tree on the far right there. I've got it kind of sticking out of the silhouette there, and it just kind of breaks up that line, so you don't just get a big sharp line running across a large portion of the image. I'm also bringing in some more planes here, which are essentially the inverse version of the glow planes. They're basically the same thing, but without the glow. They're just making stuff darker. So I'm kind of making the edges of the image a little bit darker. Also, I made a bit of a mistake there. I was working with auto keying on, so every time I was moving meshes, it was applying keyframes to them, which is not good because if I wanted to move them again, then those meshes would just move back. So try not to do that because I've just had to go through my entire outliner and remove the keyframes from everything. That wasn't fun. I'm also using a pack of cloud images which I got from photobash.co, is it? Yeah, and basically just using those as masks for a translucent layer, a translucent shader. Sorry, these don't really play a prominent role in the image towards the end, but they can be very useful in many images. They're really cool, kind of like a more complicated version of the glow planes. Very easy to abuse. Don't overdo it. But yeah, just bringing in some more plants, trying to use them to hide some of the seams between meshes there as well. That can be quite handy. Yeah, Quixel Bridge is very useful. Please use it. It's saving me a lot of time here. If you had to make all of this yourself, you'd be here for months. There's no point. Just don't do it. I'm also cheating these trees a little bit by essentially scaling up a bush that I got from Megascans, and you know that's not a good way of doing it. I don't really recommend that, but I didn't care because I knew I was just going to use some photos over the top or paint over them, so I just needed something there as a placeholder. Really, I'm not too fussed. Yeah, so now I'm starting to make some vines or roots. I don't know what you want to call them. I guess they're more roots. But I'm basically starting with just an edge and extruding it, and then I'm basically using a skin modifier to add some thickness to it. And then if you select all the vertices, press I think it's Control A, you can change the the depth of the skin modifier and make it thicker or thinner. And yeah, and then I'm just adding another subdivision modifier on top, and then a displace modifier on top of that, which is using a bark displacement texture from Megascans again. Who would have thought? Yeah, that's basically, it doesn't look perfect, but it's enough for a base for a Paintover. So yeah, I'm basically just going around and extruding these edges. Every time you make a new edge, you have to press mark root for it to basically add thickness to it with the skin modifier. I'm not sure why. I don't think the skin modifier is actually meant to be used for this purpose, but it does the job. There are other methods for doing this. You could use curves, and it'd probably give you better results, but I'd rather work with mesh than curves. It's a bit more intuitive to use. But yeah, I'm essentially just putting these roots all over the whole scene. It takes a while, but I think it's worth it. It makes a nice sort of bit of interest and some nice areas of detail. Uh, Even though I don't really end up using these in the final. They get painted over, but it's a good place to start anyway. So now I'm about to try and unify the scene a little bit more by bringing in some moss. I'm just bringing in the material now and making some tweaks to it, just trying to get the colour that I want. I really like that saturated yellow kind of green colour that's on that tree over there, so I'm trying to match it to that. And I'm essentially bringing that material in and using a mix shader node to mix it with the base material on that. I'm starting with that tree trunk there, and basically I'm using a geometry node and then feeding the normal into a separate XYZ node, and then the Z output should give you a mask of all of the upward facing normals, and then you can sort of apply a noise to that to kind of break it up a little bit. But yeah, you can basically use that as a mask, and then you'll have all of your moss only growing on the tops of objects. And then if you group all of those nodes using Control G, you can then copy that node group into any shader in the scene. And then if you make changes within that node group, it'll apply it to the whole scene. So I can play with the scale of the noise there, and it affects the entire scene, which is very handy. But yeah, having that same shader going across all of the meshes there is really helping to kind of pull the whole thing together. And there's me playing around with the camera moving. I'm not sure why I was doing that. It's not really relevant, but yeah, that moss is really starting to help, I think. So now I'm getting started with modeling this building. At the moment, I'm just blocking out a rough shape using subdivision service. In fact, I've not even applied the subdivision to it yet, but I will do just to smooth that out. Another thing to note is that I'm actually modeling this in a separate scene, and then I'm referencing that scene back into the main Blender file, just because that main file is getting a little bit dense, so it's a bit laggy, and I just want it to be as responsive as possible while I'm modeling. It also means that I only have to model one, and then it'll update on all of them every time I refresh the file in this main scene. And you can link a file in like this by just going to File, Link, and then just choose the file you want to reference in your main file. But yeah, I'm just, I've subdivided the main shape there, and then I'm using some of the edges on that main shape to extrude out some beams and things like that. And I'm pretty much just going back and forth between the main file and this just to see what works and what doesn't, and getting some materials in as well quite early, just so I can see it in the context of the lighting. That bamboo texture did not look good at first. That was a very ugly colour. But yeah, I'm just kind of using some mix RGB shaders to play with the colour, and then a noise texture there to add some roughness variation. I think soon I bring in the moss from the main scene as well, just for another layer on top. Um, but yeah, a couple of different variations of wood there as well, just to break up the materials. yeah, I'm just using a few different methods to model on top of this. I used a skin modifier on a duplicated version of the mesh there inside just to add some sort of structural beams inside, or at least suggest them. You're probably not going to see it because they're all in shadow, but maybe it'll pick up a little bit of light. And just modeling into those subdivided meshes, just adding some extra details and using some booleans there. Just to add some more structural beams. It's basically just doing the same sort of thing over and over again until it's detailed enough, really. Yeah, so now I've just decided to jump into Photoshop really quickly just to kind of make a plan for what I want to do with this image. I guess I was feeling a little bit stuck with it, so this can be a good thing to do. Like just actually give yourself a little bit of art direction in the form of a paint over. I knew that I wanted my character to be red, um, just because that stands out against the greenery and everything, so that works quite well. Yeah, I'm just bringing in a photo from photobash.co again, and yeah, just kind of painting over that and using that as a base for now. And then I think in a second I paint over the building a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Paint over the building a little bit, just make a plan for what I want to do with that. Putting some moss on and some vines and things, making it feel a little bit older. So yeah, after making that, I realized the next step was to start bringing in the character. So I bring in the photo that I used as a base, and then I'm just going to go in and colorize him to be the color that I want. This doesn't have to be, precise or anything. This is really just a base. It's going to get painted over, but it's just nice to have something in the scene, like in the 3D scene, so you can see it all in context. But yeah, just cutting him out at the moment, and then I'll re-import him into the scene there. And then I'm going to bring him into his own scene so I can work on him separately, and I will cut out the mesh using the knife tool in just a second. Yeah, there you go. And yeah, basically just make a big card of him, like cut out character or whatever. So yeah, once I've cut that out, I'm just going to extrude it out just to add some thickness, and then bevel the edges and just clean that up a little bit as well, because there's a lot of overlapping faces and things. It doesn't need to be perfect, but just enough so that you don't get weird render artifacts and Z fighting and stuff. Yeah, this is a bit of an abomination, but it's more than enough for the paint over. Yeah, I'm just playing around with proportional editing there and smoothing it with the sculpt tool as well, just so he's not completely flat. Yeah, also feeding the base texture through a bump node, just so you get a bit of normal mapping, bump mapping, just so it's affecting the light a little bit. And then there he is in the scene. I think he works all right from the point of view of the camera. If you were to move the camera at all, it'd probably cause problems. But like I said, he's going to get painted over anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And then yeah, I'm back onto the building here, trying to match some of the stuff that I did in that paint over there. Essentially just using it as the plan for what I'm going to do next with it. So yeah, you're not really seeing anything new here with what I'm doing on the building. It's more of just the same techniques over and over again, to be honest. These bamboo structures I'm making now are the same technique as the vines, like the vines and roots from before. Um, Essentially that minus the displacement. So you just got smooth version. I don't know, a smooth version of the vines, I guess. But yeah, they seem to work quite well. And yeah, I'm just continually adding more and more detail to these buildings. They don't need to be that detailed because it's kind of like it's off in the distance. I'm never going to get that close to it. But yeah, starting to get there. At the moment, I'm starting to play with adding a few more buildings in the back, but this effort was futile because they don't make it to the final image. They just get removed in the Paintover. But yeah, I just thought I'd leave this in the video anyway, so you can see how the image making process sort of evolves as you go. So when I was making these buildings, I did use the same technique as the other buildings, basically bringing it into its own scene, modeling it separately so I can kind of do it with no lag, and then it would also update for all of the duplicates as well. But yeah, like I said, these get removed anyway, but yeah, you may as well see it, so there you go. Yeah, there you have it. That's basically all there is for the 3D section. Done my render. Basically for the render, I did a denoise pass, just using the compositor. There's a lot of tutorials out there how to use a denoiser. I do write briefly in the article about how to use it as well. But yeah, I also used a couple of Eevee renders to make some masks as well. Despite me doing some masking on screen right now, but yeah, basically I did my main cycles render, and then I also did some Eevee renders with certain parts of the scene hidden, and then I've got transparency turned on for those Eevee renders, and then I'm basically just using those renders as the masks for the cycles render when I bring them into Photoshop. And that's a bit of a weird way of doing it. I could use a crypto mat to spit out like a clown pass, but I don't really like them. They don't seem to be anti-aliased, or I don't know. Just the selections never come out very nice. They're not very smooth. But anyway, using some of those selections that I've made, I've separated everything out into layers, just so I've got different areas. I've got like the foreground on its own layer and everything, so I can paint behind the trees, as you can see. And I'm just starting to sort of paint over the 3D now, and kind of establish the overall tone of the image. Just bring it closer to what I actually had in mind, and what I didn't manage to achieve in 3D, using some photos here and there as well. But yeah, I try to be quite loose with the initial paint over. I tend to not really care too much about preserving much of the 3D. I mean, I don't really want to preserve it anyway because it looks very fake and CG. So the sooner I can kind of get rid of it, the better. Which doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense considering I've just spent so much time making the 3D. But I think you wouldn't get to this point in the first place without it unless you were, you know, quite either quite good at painting or you spent a long time doing it. So yeah. essentially at this point, I've pretty much decided I'm just gonna demolish the 3D render and yeah, just painting over the whole thing. Don't really care if I'm hiding the render at all. I'm just making changes where I feel there needs to be changes made and improvements to composition. Kind of going back and forth until I feel like it feels good. I'm starting to develop a bit of like a pattern to the roots as well, a bit of like a swirling pattern that leads down the pathway a little bit. Just kind of an S shape developing, feeding toward the character. But yeah, I'm not really focusing on details too much at the moment. Just big broad strokes, and then I can worry about the details later on. So yeah, here I'm starting to bring in a few more photos, and I'm using the Akviz artwork trick again, just essentially instantly integrating the photo into the painting. It kind of gives it a brushstroke effect, which is very, very handy. Try not to overuse that one too much because people who do use Akviz artwork can instantly spot it. Like it has a very distinct look. So if if you find yourself using it too much, try to cover that one up a little bit, because yeah, people probably won't like it if they can spot it. Yeah, I'm also playing with my value structure as well a little bit. In the original sketch, the character was light and the background behind him was darker, but I've kind of flipped that around now. The character's darker than the background, and we've got a big, bright cloud going past conveniently, just so he stands out. Uh, yeah. Also, I'm bringing in some leaves here, just to kind of pad out that canopy at the top. I'm using again from photobash.co a pack of alpha mass trees. I think there's a couple of other ones in there as well, but yeah, for the most part, that's what it is. And yeah, just using that as a base to work on. I'm sort of building up on top of everything as I go in layers. But yeah, I'll just be adding more and more photos on top, for the time being, and then I'll do another paint over pass towards the end just so it's all sort of integrated together nicely. So I've essentially got the painting to a point where pretty much all of the elements are there in the image, but they're all still quite rough. I think at this point I start to bring in some more photos, especially in the tree area up there. But yeah, eventually the entire thing will be essentially plastered in photos. Uh, that's pretty much my approach. I kind of start out quite rough with a loose paint over, and then tighten everything up. Afterwards, it's a pretty standard process, really. Yeah, giving the character a little bit of a paint over here, just so he's not Mr. Blobby or whatever like before. Um, but yeah, not quite taking him to final just yet. So yeah, starting to bring in some photos on the ground area there. I'm just kind of throwing them in and not really bothering to integrate them straight away. Just just patching over pretty much everything there. But yeah, when you come to integrate the photos, try to take your time with that, because a badly integrated photo really will stand out, and it's also it's quite a difficult balancing act. It's not really something that you can rush. Yeah, start out matching the value, and then match your colors, and then if you need to, match the saturation as well. Sort of in that order usually. Um, and then after that you can kind of go through and apply some effects to it, maybe with Akvi's artwork. You can make it a bit more painterly, and then you can paint over the top of that just to kind of integrate it in a bit more, just so it sits better in the painting, and it just doesn't stick out like a sore thumb that there's a photo in the middle of your painting. Generally looks a bit weird. You should be aiming to have it so it's quite a seamless transition. So yeah, in this case, rather than applying the Aquifers filter to everything in like individually, I just kind of did it all as one layer on top, just to kind of integrate everything together. And then after that, I'm using that as a base to start to paint on top of, and kind of add some detail and make some changes where I feel like it's needed. But I'm definitely getting to more of a polish phase now. Um, yeah, it's not really in it, I don't really work in clear cut steps. Like I have, I don't have particular phases where I go like, "Oh, now I'm in the polish phase." I do kind of jump around a little bit, but I am in a polish phase, and then I will probably go back to sort of making big changes again very soon, and then back to another polish phase. But yeah, that's just kind of how it works. It's a bit more of a fluid approach. So yeah, I'm just using some AI artwork again here, mainly just to pad out some of the textured areas. They don't really play a prominent role in this, but yeah, just kind of adding a bit of extra detail, more or less for free. And you know, they already look quite nice. You know, you don't really have to do much to them other than just color correct them and make them fit into the scene. But yeah, I'm kind of just going through systematically here and just identifying the ugliest part of the image and working on that and just kind of just rinse and repeat with that until the whole image sort of looks good. Um, Sometimes towards the end I'll make a new layer and I'll just circle all the bits I'm not happy with in red, and then I've basically got like a to-do list. Then every time I resolve a certain area, I'll just erase that circle, and then once I've got no more circles, then ideally the piece is finished, but you know, it never really works out like that. I'm also bringing back some of the 3D render here, using some of the vines from the original render, just because I feel like they were a nice detail. They don't look too bad, and I can kind of fix them up a little bit with a little bit of paint over. It's just a nice bit of extra interest to that area, and also the lines sort of they lead towards the character as well, which is a nice thing, rather than it just being like a tree which is kind of blocking off the composition. So yeah, here's me again trying to get that tree to work there. I think I've tried to fight with that one, you know, 3 or 4 times already. I guess the moral of the story is just, you know, just keep on you know, working on it until you're happy with it. Don't just kind of give up on an area and say, oh, that'll do, because good enough isn't good enough. You know, just yeah. Anyway, I feel like that particular tree felt quite flat until I brought in that particular photo. That one's working quite well and it's been integrated fairly well. So I'm just giving it a bit of a paint over now. Another thing to note when I'm doing these paint overs as well, is there's certain areas that you should emphasize with the detailing. you should kind of focus on the terminator of the shadow, like where the light side rolls into the shadow side, and that's where you should be putting most of your detail. I think I've quite done it on all the trees just yet, but I do try and focus on that area later on, and just put as much high contrast detail there as you can, because it really makes the piece feel more finished. You can have sort of like bits of bark casting shadows onto other bits of the tree and stuff, and yeah, it's just a good place to add detail. So yeah, here I'm adding some hanging vines down from those trees. Essentially, I basically blocked out the silhouette of it using a hard round brush, and then I'm using a clipping mask to paint within that, and kind of have a gradient going from like a golden color to a brown color. So you can dictate where the light's hitting it and stuff. It's quite a nice technique there. I think it helps pull the piece together a little bit too. It's also worth noting that some areas I'm not really focusing on quite as much. I don't want to bring the entire piece to a finished quality. Um, I, there's some areas around the edges, especially on the left side there, where I'm just kind of leaving it quite loose, and it stays just as loose throughout the entire painting, really. Just because if the entire piece was finished to the same level of detail that I've got in the middle there, you just wouldn't know where to look. You're just being overloaded with details, really. So it's a good idea to keep some areas a bit more loose. And the human eye doesn't work that way anyway. You've got a small area of focus right in the middle, and then everything else is quite blurry. So there's no reason to paint like everything's in focus, because it just doesn't feel natural. Yeah, I'm starting to paint over the character a bit more now. I'm about to take him to final, I think. I think this is the last time I paint over him anyway. Yeah, I'm just trying to bring in some extra bits of gold there just to vary up the materials a little bit, just so he's not all just one big red blob. um, but yeah, just adding some golden armor there as well, just kind of adding some interest and a bit of narrative, suggesting what sort of character he is. Being some sort of warrior or something. Uh, he's returning to his village after being told he'll never make it back alive or something. I just made that up on the spot, but yeah, just trying to add a little bit more interest. I'm trying to make those gold details pop a bit more by having each bit cast a shadow, and everything makes it feel a bit more three-dimensional, rather than just being like a gold line on top of the character painting, and just trying to focus on like having kind of cast shadows within the character itself. Just the cloth casting shadow on itself, and things like that, and just really trying to sharpen everything up as much as I can. He is the focal point of this image, so it's worth spending the time to get him to be quite detailed. So yeah, like I said before, when I'm working on painting over some of these trees and stuff, and this is especially the case with rounded objects, you want to just put the most detail on the terminator there. Just have that section really pop, and to be honest, on the lighter side, you could get away with not really having almost any detail. It can be almost block color, but if you really focus your attention on that terminator area, then it'll make the whole thing feel a lot more finished for about half the work, and it'll probably look better anyway. Some people say this polishing phase is quite painstaking, I guess, but yeah, I don't think it is. I find it quite therapeutic, really. Just put on some music or put on an audio book and just chip away at the piece. At this point, you don't really have to think much about what you're doing. It's automatic. It doesn't really require your full attention. You're just kind of fixing up what's there already. I feel like the parts of the painting that do require a lot of attention are when you're making decisions on how things should look and trying to be a bit more creative. But yeah, this is not one of those parts. You just kind of add in detail. You're essentially an AI upscaler at this point. But yeah, I'm also adding a few extra clouds there between the midground and the background just to kind of put some distance between the layers and knock it back a little bit. Makes the whole environment feel a little bit bigger and separates things out. Also, kind of like putting a brighter value behind the character as well and making the character stand out a bit more. So yeah, at this point, I sat there and looked at my piece really critically and thought this doesn't really feel like the jungle that it should feel like. It feels more like I'm in the woods or something. So I decided to get a tropical plant pack from photobash.co, and I'm just bringing in all those plants, just kind of placing them and not really worrying about how they are integrated just yet. And I thought that was a nice touch there as well, having a flower right next to the character that is more or less the same color as the character. But yeah, just kind of throwing them in, and I will integrate them later. Kind of gives me a big chunk to get through there. Um, yeah, also you should really just sit there and be as critical as you can about the painting and try to see if there's anything that you're being precious with or any big changes that need to be made. You should do your best to try and look at your piece as if you're a third party, and if you can't do that, then actually just show it to someone else and see what they think, and try not to be offended by their feedback. Just take it on the chin and take their advice. If you think they're a good artist, it's worth taking their advice. Just go for it. Yeah, I'm using mostly the same techniques as before to integrate these plants. Just doing a sort of curves layer on top and adjusting the value and then the colors and then maybe the saturation if I need to. I'm also using Aqua's artwork as well to kind of remove the photo-iness, if that is a word. That is not a word. That is the technical term. But yeah, just on top of that, I will, with these plants especially, just do a little bit of a paint over on top, just because when you're doing, when you're using Aqua's artwork on something that's got transparency, it tends to mess up on sort of thin areas like stems and stuff like that. So you kind of need to give them a little bit of a paint over on top just to fix them up. And also, just kind of match the lighting as well a little bit more. Like there's a lot of kind of specular highlights and glossy elements on plants that people should appreciate more. And you know it's always good to paint them in and make it feel like it's sitting in the scene a little bit better. Get a specular highlight where you would expect to see one from the sun, or if they're in shadow, you could kind of have a bit of a specular glossy highlight coming from the sky, and that could be a bit more blue. Yeah, that tends to work quite well. At this point, I remember starting to get a bit sick of looking at this piece. I'm just kind of persevering and adding the last few sort of bits of detail here and there just to really tighten the whole thing up. But we are starting to come to the end now, and I'll be applying some finishing touches very soon. At this point, I'm essentially just detailing until I'm sick of doing it, and then when I'm sick of doing it, I'll call it done. So yeah, we've more or less made it to the end of the image now, so I'm just going to be adding a few finishing touches that I go over in a fair bit of detail in the article, but I'm essentially just adding some color variation first, and then I'll merge everything down, add a 1 or 2 pixel blur to some areas just to knock them back a little bit. Some areas I'll add a bit of a sharpen to just to increase the detail level, and then I'm also adding a chromatic aberration and a film grain on top just to kind of just bring it all together and make it feel a bit more finished. Yeah, also this is a good time just to check your color grading as well and just make sure that you're happy with your colors. But there you go, there's the final image. I hope you learned something during this tutorial, and maybe if this goes down well I might do more of these. But yeah, there it is. I'm fairly happy with it. I think it went quite well.